My name again is Chris Rico. I am a recent graduate of the Minnesota Heritage Studies and Public History program. I currently work as the public history coordinator for a small cultural resource management company called Nino Cultural Consultants. I was hired to basically build a public history kind of initiatives with combining that with archaeology from the ground up. And it's a very exciting position that I feel fortunate to be in. I'm excited to be a part of the Minnesota Transform Showcase Week, and I really want to thank Minnesota Transform and especially Sebastian Alfonso for working with me over the last few weeks and inviting me to present this workshop. This version of the workshop is sort of a 2.0 version or a light version of a workshop that I presented and organized as a part of my capstone for the Heritage Studies and Public History program last spring. This version is slightly reworked to reflect insights given to me via an invitation to Michelle Garvey's Environmental Justice Sustainability course. And I thank her class and Michelle for inspiring me to reapproach this project through a lens of environmental justice. So this project remains largely the same, and backing up a little bit, the story map that you're seeing on your screen is the bulk of the project and what I'll be using to kind of go through with everybody today. I'll be using it as my sort of presentation. Backing up again, I do want to say that there will hopefully be some group discussion that you can expect in this workshop. We'll have breakout rooms online, and then for folks in person, we'll just be going around the table a little bit, and we'll come back together. There'll be 2 opportunities within the next hour and a half for a full kind of group discussion. That said, this project remains largely the same as it was last year, with the goals being to create a kind of resource that uses student and community narratives of the university and knowledges to reimagine university spaces and reimagine or reinform our own knowledges and our knowledges of the university's histories and spaces. And so again, this second version of the workshop really further demonstrates the different kinds of dimensions in which this project seeks to engage communities in through mapping and giving kind of in-person or virtual tours of campus, which incorporates these community gathered narratives and knowledges of campus. That said, the contemporary values, I believe, of a university community can and are reflected in how that institution confronts contemporary issues and frames them, as well as historic issues. We see this currently going on with the Minnesota Transform project overall, as well as the Minnesota Truth project more specifically. But there's still work to be done. This project aims to disrupt exclusionary narratives of the university, along with and add to the work that's been already done with Minnesota Truth and Minnesota Transform, and facilitate discussion on lesser known or less acknowledged communities, histories, and stories. It does this, again, primarily through this shareable story map. We'll come back up to some of these discussion questions. I want to show you some of the utility of the story map. It does this by offering a survey, which if I believe this was shared in the chat, you should be able to follow along with me in the story map if you want, and actually make an entry in this, which we'll get into later when you're in your breakout room. But of course, feel free to explore as we go along. So participants can go into this survey and make an entry. Really, one thing I want to stress is the title of this. Sorry, I have to re-navigate back to my notes. the title of this workshop is called Whose Campus History? And I want to stress that history I'm using as a very broad term. So sorry. Yeah, so I want you to think of history as a personal story or experience that's not restricted by time or space. It doesn't necessarily have to be restricted by the university space either, which is something that we'll get into in this version of the workshop and something that this version of the workshop focuses on. So while some of these questions are framed heavily around campus and university, I don't want you to think that a personal experience of yours isn't credible or game for this survey. Really anything that you can think of relating to the kind of themes of this workshop being countermapping, environmental justice, and storytelling is fair game in this. It doesn't have to be a knowledge of a certain university history that you know of. So participants can go in, and I suggest clicking the home button when you go into this application, and that will bring you straight to the University of Minnesota campus. And you can move this pen around to illustrate a different location on campus, hopefully linking to your own personal experience, your knowledge of university history, etc. And I encourage you to be creative when you're marking on this map, just because maybe you can't tie your story to a specific building or place on campus, but thinking of perhaps the river, again, which will be a theme that we're sort of focusing on in this workshop, being something that connects the university to spaces far beyond the physical boundaries of the university. You can also enter an address in here if you feel comfortable sharing a precise address. You can share images to illustrate your story. And as well, this is sort of illustrating the utility of this story map in leaving an email and letting us know whether it's okay to follow up with you to get more information on the story, to be perhaps featured in a tour or online tour. And again, links to images, websites, news stories, any contextual information, as well as room for an email. Once hitting submit on that form, directly below is this kind of live map of the university campus. Again, you can, I believe all of the map stories right now will be in this area. If some of you today might choose to mark a point out of the University of Minnesota Twin Cities campus space, you might wish to zoom out of this and look around for other dots. But you can click on these red dots and see the community narrative or what has been entered by that person within the survey. You can do sort of a quick summary of the entry, seeing links and images that are available to view. And again, it's essentially the answers to that survey form linked out on the map. The main purpose, again, of this is to sort of crowdsource. The main purpose of the survey is to crowdsource community knowledges, community stories of campus spaces or things related to the university, and make them accessible to other people to see. As well, this is kind of meant to demonstrate how somebody might want to use this kind of application or workshop in their own organization or with their own group in their own way. So I want to get a little into some of the two kind of major themes of this workshop, those being countermapping, and we'll get into that first, followed by environmental justice. And I want to kind of create a collective understanding of these terms. So I have written that a place is a location, this quote by Sebastian Cucard, a place is a location comprising both the material and the immaterial. the material compromising the landscape, geographical location, and topological characteristics, and immaterial compromising the human dimension of emotions, memories, reminiscences, and recollections. And I really want us to focus on that immaterial concept, or that concept of the immaterial, when we're thinking about countermapping. Mapping is an inherently political act, used most often to designate nations' strategic space, material resources, kind of a way for the state to keep tabs on resources. They often focus on or turn the land into a view of its resources and work to aid in commodifying those resources. While countermapping seeks to disrupt that kind of colonial view and shift the perspective to this immaterial view, again, of the resources of the land. Countermaps can also focus on material characteristics, but still work to shift the viewer's perspective of space. And you'll find examples of both of these immaterial and material countermaps below. And these are a few examples of my favorite countermaps. I'll click on this one here that I think a lot of us may be familiar with. Is a Dakota land map, or kind of reimagining, or I shouldn't say reimagining, correcting the metro, Twin Cities metro space as it is to the Dakota people whose home it is. And I really enjoy this map because I think it really does a great job of illustrating both this idea of material things that a map would highlight, as well as the immaterial. So we see things like riverways, we see the cities highlighted still, but our perspective is shifted to that of the Dakota's perspective with the place names and the way that the space is kind of reorganized around the sacred sites pictured in the map. Another excellent, I really like this map as well. I'm not sure how well we can see it on the big screen here, but this kind of personalization of these different city spaces and this really kind of artistic input into reimagining again how we look at or how we classify or designate spaces. So some kind of collective questions I want to ask, and for those of us online, I'm going to switch to a different camera that will allow you to hear everyone in the room a little bit better, I believe, if we're talking together, and I'll also pass around a microphone. If it's too distracting, just put something in the chat and I'll try to keep an eye out for it, and I think we'll just stick to the mic, but we'll give this a go. Actually, I'm going to keep it on this so everybody can see everybody can still see the questions, and I'll pass a mic around to those of us in the room. You'll be able to interact more visually later in the workshop. So I just want to ask everyone, kind of with this discussion that I've been having on, you know, the difference between material, immaterial, and this different kind of shifting our perspective of looking at spaces. What is a map? Simply, you know, what do you think, what comes to your mind when you think of a map? What should it show? Who is it for?
A way to navigate place.
A way to navigate place.
Shows you where things are located.
Shows us where things are located. And these are great. These are the exact kind of responses that I'm looking for.
Depending on who creates the map, some things will stand out as key elements of it, and some things will fade away or be ignored.
Mm-hmm. And so with that being said, can we think of any examples of how maps communicate or represent power, or that kind of represent like who the map is made for? And I think speaking for myself, something that I always think of, I mean, you always think back to, or at least I always think back to, the first thing that comes into my mind when I hear map is grade, in grade school, the colorful geography maps, and it's the borders are very defined, obviously, on those, especially on those like different color. I don't know the technical term for those maps. I think they're like, I can't remember, but you'll always see them in schools and stuff like that. The borders are very defined on them, more so than on other maps that you might be looking at in a book, or as opposed to that. I believe it's called like a geographic, or it highlights geographic, something like that. But that said, that's one way to represent state power or hard power.
Yeah, and they often, they include particular information, especially when they're sort of general maps like that. So calling attention to like cities, for example, and capital cities as the most important things to pay attention to.
Yeah, so maps point to specific features or objects within the space that they represent. For example, as Kevin, I'm just repeating what Kevin said for everybody listening, because I'm forgetting to pass around the microphone, but specific things like cities and towns, centering those.
Maps can also distort what we find most important. So a map maker could exaggerate the appearance of a landmass by comparison to another landmass if they're trying to showcase, like, let's say, the import of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
It would appear as if it was equivalent in size to, when it's really not, to a different country or continent.
Yeah, so maps distort space, they distort size. A really good example, or a really good and saying, or thing that always pops into my head is why is North, or why is North America or the globe positioned the way it is?
Mm-hmm.
In science, or when we talk about astronomy, there is no up, down, north, south, east, west. It's all the same. So why we look at the world the way we look at it. So what are some benefits to, with that said, we're thinking maps are very visual, right? And this workshop is focusing on verbal kind of storytelling. So what are the benefits, or why would we want to, map histories or map stories? And again, I think using all of kind of what we've been talking about in the last few minutes really plays into that. We can highlight different stories. We can center different spaces. Again, my thinking with this project is we can create resources for community members or interested public to learn more about, somebody who they might identify with more. What's their experience of the university like? Speaking again for myself, going on university tours and things like that, when I was first coming to campus, we're shown a lot of the flashy things that the university has, the nice libraries and the athletic center and the Memorial Union. But we're not told about any, at least I wasn't. I know that I'm aware of tours that do this around campus, but we weren't told about specific experiences or what to expect, or student groups or things like that. Very broad. Go ahead, Sebastian.
Chris, apparently your voice is going in and out a little bit for the Zoom people. Could you try using the mic?
Yeah. Is that, I'm hoping that's better. Okay. So yeah, I think I was wrapped up on that thought. Again, so mapping stories and community experiences with the intention of creating a resource for like-minded or similar people to find a similar experience in. Now I want to ask, what is environmental justice? So I want to read this kind of bland quote from the EPA. So the Environmental Protection Agency defines environmental justice as requiring that no group of people should bear a disproportionate share of the negative environmental consequences resulting from industrial, governmental, and commercial operations or policies, and calls for fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all people regardless of race, color, national origin, or income with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws, regulations, and policies. I don't think that there's anything necessarily, I mean, I think we can pick apart any kind of statement from the government or what have you. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with this statement. However, what comes to your mind when you read this quote or when you think of the term environmental justice?
Very people-centered and person-oriented.
It's very people-centered, people and person-centered. Sorry, I had to. I think we have something in the chat. I know, speaking for myself, before I learned or gained a more broad understanding of environmental justice, it always pops into my head, you know, like Earth Day or Tree Day or Arbor Day. You know, we're working to change, to address climate change, and these things are all absolutely a part of environmental justice. But I think a more important or broader understanding is like what some of the examples have been shared in here is it's very intersectional. It's also about people. It's about racial justice. It's about climate justice. And it's also about something, again, from Michelle's class that kind of changed my way of thinking, or I shouldn't say changed, but informed how I think about environmental justice. Is it's also the space around us. It's not exclusive to environmental as we think of equating to, say, climate change. It's also space and place. So I just want to go through, I'm going to try, I think I'm kind of been dragging on my part of the workshop a little longer than I wanted to. So I'm going to go through these next several examples sort of quickly, and there will be discussion questions for each section, and I encourage you, if any of those questions interest you, to kind of save them in your head, and I'll represent them to you also at the end, so they'll be there for your reference. But take one or two of those questions into your breakout room with you, and discuss them along with an event or a history or experience or knowledge of your own that you think or that you would want to map. So the first example, these are kind of meant to illustrate the different kinds of resources, initiatives, histories, and narratives that we can highlight in a map or in a project like this. Again, applying this, you know, being able to apply this kind of model for a project to your own community group, your own project. So canoe rising and why canoes, mapping community groups and sites of knowledge. This is a, sorry, flipping through my notes again. This is a project that was a student group. Canoe Rising was started by Jacob Rainier, Vincent Diaz, and others to, I'm sorry. So it's an inclusive student group focused on Minnesota natural waterways and looks to get Native youth and as well as locals kind of reinterested or interested in this tradition, this Native tradition of of canoeing. The Why Canoes exhibit is an extension or adjacent to this student group. Again, this exhibit highlights the canoe culture in Minnesota, as well as looking at connecting to, I believe there was a Pacific Islander connection with this project. And so this is an example of both kind of what's something going on campus, as well as a student or a campus group. And so thinking about, again, how are student contributions to the university discussed in the campus narrative? Is there equal representation? I can't, for myself, think of at least an easily accessible source to me that highlights a group like Canoe Rising. I didn't know about this group until doing the research for this project. And again, something like the Why Canoes exhibit, this is an exhibit that was at Northrop that is no longer there. A map like this or a resource like this is one of many ways, and to kind of re-highlight and bring us back to this exhibit, even though it's no longer within its physical space. And then again, thinking about why student resources should be highlighted and why on a map. Canoe Rising, I feel, is a very, it's a kind of a student support group, really. And that's how I feel about a lot of student groups, speaking for myself as a member of the anthropology club when I transferred here to the University of Minnesota. I didn't know anybody, and it was a very rough first month or two adjustment for me. But through anthropology club and these kind of student-led organizations, I was able to find a community and quickly begin to thrive really on campus. And that's really important for students of all backgrounds to have access to and knowledge of. And I think that the university does an okay job of this. Again, with student group, there's a website that lists student groups, but there's always more that can be done. And I think a map is an interesting way to approach that as well. So I also want to talk about mapping difficult histories or sites of pain. Particularly, I want to talk about kind of the legacy of the University of Minnesota's physical, the Twin Cities physical campus space. And this is a history that is extensively gone through in the Minnesota Truth Report, which is where I received this information from, and there'll be a link at the bottom of the section that you can follow to get to that as well. So in 1851, as some people are likely aware, it was written into the territorial constitution that the university be built at or near the falls of St. Anthony, or Owamni as it's called in Dakota. A site was chosen for the institution at the base of Owamni or St. Anthony Falls, and by 1856, the land was plotted. University regents meeting minutes from this time indicate that there was a lobbying effort by millers. Again, St. Anthony Falls is just down the river from where campus is currently. A lobbying effort by millers to get the university to locate further from the falls, thus selling that land to someone who wanted to open a mill. This land was owned and sold by another of the original regents, Franklin Steele, and a new site was selected in the area where the university currently sits. The old site of the university, as you can probably guess, is where all of the milling and the industry of Minneapolis is right now. The original lands, those lands by Owamni were well known to be of significant importance to Dakota culture and spirituality. And like other lands held by Dakota and other indigenous peoples, they would go on to be gifted to and or sold by the university at enormous rates of profit through various means, including the Morrill Land Act of 1862. The opening of the university's doors and admission of its first class of students is directly benefited by the land theft, cultural and physical genocide, and displacement of countless indigenous communities. And again, this is a map sort of highlighting the original grounds of the university. And I think, you know, there's a lot that we can talk about within the lens of the important work that the Minnesota Truth Project is doing as well, is how could it be helpful to highlight and talk about sites and histories of discomfort and or pain. This is a really important legacy that wasn't fully understood before. I think it might be. This is a really important legacy to know about, I feel like, and it was not fully understood before the Minnesota Truth Project started its work. And building on this again, to highlight the information discussed in that section is was made available to me through discussions with Minnesota Truth research members, and mainly the recently published Minnesota Truth Report, which if you're following along on the story map right now, you should be able to just click that button and it'll bring you to the Minnesota Truth Project website. Following up on this last, the previous topic, talking about kind of applying more of what I was talking about earlier, what pops into my head when I think of environmental justice, looking at the legacy of damming the Mississippi headwaters. And we might be wondering how this is linked to the university, and going back again to, well, I'll explain this more deeply in just a second, but I want to start by reading this really profound quote of one of the leaders of the Ojibwe in the Mississippi headwaters region, which they would go on to lose their land through flooding as a result of the damming of the headwaters. He says, "We are to be paid a cent an acre. As poor as I am, if forced to take this money, I would take it and throw away." Chief White Cloud of the Mississippi Bands of Ojibwe. So in the 1880s, shortly after the university again, or sometime after the university is relocated away from the St. Anthony Falls area, construction and industry is really booming in this area. And as a result, there begins to be a need or a want from the people controlling industry in this area to better control river navigation, as well as being able to control the flow of the river to be able to power their flour mills. So a commission was created to assess the damages to the indigenous peoples, the Ojibwe peoples living in this area, who would be removed as a result of the damming. Again, the damming to control the flow of the river and to control river traffic. A commission was created to assess the damages and recommend a fair compensation for the land that would be lost. The commission found that for 46,000 acres of land, only $15,000 would constitute just compensation. And even with, even considering that this is the 1860s inflation, whatever, that's a pretty pathetic amount for that amount of land. And more importantly, what that land meant to the Ojibwe communities, who came back with $250,000 to be paid forever every 6 months, is what that land is worth to us. If we have to part with it. The commission refused to meet that number. And even though the commission was created in the legislation creating this, funding the dam building and creating this, this commission explicitly said that construction isn't to start until a fair number is agreed upon by both parties. Once this original $15,000 number was made up, construction was pretty much immediately began. Again, going back to this idea of, you can see, I believe this is on the side of the river that the university would be sitting on, but an example of the area of the falls of the Mississippi looked like during this time, just full of flour milling and industry. And again, in the eyes of the settler state or these industrial capitalists, damming this area and any adverse effects that it might cause are justified due to their ideas of usefulness of the land. A direct quote from this commission is along the lines of, "It doesn't matter, it's a lot of tamarack swamp, it's not useful land." Again, not paying attention to what it meant to the indigenous communities who held that land. It was wild rice land, it was meadow land, etc. And creating what's called a sacrifice zone, labeling it as poor tamarack swamp is therefore creating a sacrifice zone and really justifying the displacement and flooding of these lands. And so a particularly important question I want us to think about is, can you think of any other issues connected to, but primarily impacting spaces and people beyond university boundaries? Again, this is kind of looking at the Mississippi River and is a way to think about how campus also is connected to all these different spaces and things going on beyond the traditional boundaries of the campus. Lastly, I want to touch on a pretty well-known history in some circles of the university, the Morrill Hall takeover, as an example of, again, thinking broadly about environment and space and what we mean by that, and what highlighting different spaces on campus, how that informs that idea of environment. So around on January 14th in 1969, students from the Afro-American Action Committee, aided by later with support from the Students for a Democratic Society, took over and occupied Morrill Hall on the University of Minnesota East Bank until January 15th, 1969. The takeover happened as a result of the university not meeting three simple demands laid out by the previous parties. One being that the university defray half the cost of a Black conference, estimated to be a cost of $8,000. Second, that an Afro-American Studies department leading to a BA degree be established. And third, that a budget for the Martin Luther King Scholarship Fund be placed in the hands of an agency within the Black community. Again, not capitulating to those demands is what led to the Morrill Hall takeover. Those demands make sense to me and seem pretty simple to me. The takeover did end after a memorandum of understanding was signed between the two previously mentioned parties and the office of the president. However, during the night of this takeover, there was reason to believe of the students who were occupying the hall that a forceful takeover or a violent takeover was imminent by police looking to arrest them, kick them out of the hall, take the hall back. As a result of that kind of panic, the doors were barricaded with various things from inside the office, and eventually the Ramsey County grand jury issued an indictment for several students who took part in the protest. And this was a really unusual event and met with a lot of criticism from the university community, as it was really unusual for county government to get involved in a university matter like this. And again, I'll skip through the rest of that and just kind of again ask or pose the question, how can highlighting acts of student resistance or acts of change inform our view of the campus environment and its community? With that said, that's going through the kinds of, I wanted to highlight a broad array of different issues, knowledges, resources that can be touched on in a resource like this. So when we're thinking of mapping and we're thinking of environmental justice. These are the different kinds of things, you know, to get you thinking, to get the wheels turning on, you know, the kind of thinking of non-traditional things. And that said, I think that's it. Thank you everyone for coming and for sharing your thoughts, sharing your knowledges. Thank you, Minnesota Transform, for allowing this work to happen and for inviting me back to present on it. And again, if you're looking for more information, go to the Minnesota Transform website. If you're looking for more information on Minnesota Truth, you can Google it, or similarly go to their website and find more information on the Minnesota Transform website. So that said, I'll close us out. Thank you everyone for attending, and have a safe and great night.